Chapter 1, The Hidden Self, establishes the psychological foundation of Unmasked, a journey back to the authentic self, by examining not behavior, but how identity is shaped through early self-suppression. Drawing from developmental psychology and lived experience, it reframes people-pleasing, emotional numbing, and self-doubt, not as flaws, but as adaptive strategies formed to preserve safety and belonging. The chapter traces these patterns to childhood, where subtle emotional cues taught which parts of the self were acceptable. By replacing self-judgment with context, it shifts the core question from "what is wrong with me?" to "what did I learn to survive?" A shift that dissolves shame and initiates genuine healing. One of the chapter's most important analytical points is its emphasis on biology. The choice to suppress is not framed as a conscious or rational decision. It is framed as a nervous system response rooted in attachment needs. For a child, connection is survival. When authenticity threatens connection, the body prioritizes belonging. This prioritization is automatic. It is not chosen. This insight helps explain why self-suppression feels so deeply ingrained and resistant to change later in life. It is not a habit layered on top of identity. It is woven into identity itself. As the chapter progresses, it explores how this adaptive process gradually reshapes internal dialogue. The child's attention shifts away from internal signals toward external approval. Questions like, "What do I feel?" and "What do I need?" are replaced with "What is expected?" and "What will keep me accepted?" This shift marks the beginning of the hidden self. The chapter makes clear that suppression is rarely dramatic. It does not require trauma in the conventional sense. Instead, it accumulates through repeated moments where authenticity is postponed or abandoned in favor of harmony. Family systems are examined as a primary context in which this conditioning occurs. The chapter avoids assigning blame, instead highlighting how emotional rules are transmitted across generations. In emotionally restrictive families, expression may be discouraged because caregivers themselves lack the capacity to tolerate it. In achievement-oriented families, love may become intertwined with performance. In unpredictable or chaotic environments, emotional monitoring and peacekeeping may become essential survival skills. The child adapts not because the environment is evil, but because it is limited. The chapter then expands the analysis beyond family into broader cultural forces. Gender norms, religious frameworks, educational systems, and economic pressures all narrow the range of acceptable selfhood. Certain emotions are sanctioned while others are punished. Productivity is rewarded over presence. Obedience is often valued more than authenticity. These forces reinforce early conditioning, making suppression feel not only necessary, but virtuous. Over time, the mask becomes socially validated. A key distinction introduced in the chapter is the difference between functioning and living. Many adults operate at high levels of competence while experiencing a persistent sense of emptiness or disconnection. They meet expectations, fulfill roles, and receive praise, yet feel internally misaligned. The chapter argues that this disconnection is not mysterious. It is the logical outcome of long-term self-monitoring. When identity is organized around external approval, internal coherence erodes. One of the chapter's most compelling analytical contributions is its discussion of embodiment. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They are stored. The body becomes the repository for unexpressed truth. Chronic tension, anxiety, fatigue, numbness, and stress-related illness are framed not as random malfunctions, but as signals. The chapter emphasizes that the nervous system retains memory even when the conscious mind rationalizes or minimizes experience. This perspective has practical implications. Healing cannot be purely intellectual. Reconnection requires attunement to bodily signals. The chapter also examines how modern coping strategies extend the mask rather than remove it. Social media, constant productivity, overworking, substance use, and endless stimulation are analyzed as strategies that reduce contact with the self. These behaviors are not condemned. They are contextualized. They function to manage the discomfort that arises when the self is disconnected but still seeking expression. Understanding this prevents the reader from treating symptoms as enemies rather than signals. Importantly, the chapter resists the temptation to frame authenticity as an immediate goal. It recognizes that for many people, sudden honesty feels unsafe. If suppression developed as a protective response, then forcing exposure can re-traumatize rather than heal. Instead, the chapter positions awareness as the first and most essential step. Awareness of when one is performing. Awareness of when one is silencing themselves. Awareness of how often comfort is chosen over truth. From a practical standpoint, this emphasis on awareness shifts how application is understood. The chapter does not ask the reader to change behavior immediately. It asks them to observe, to notice patterns without judgment, to identify the moments when the mask appears. This approach aligns with trauma-informed psychology, which recognizes that safety precedes change. Awareness creates choice. Without it, repetition remains automatic. The lessons of the chapter can be applied in everyday life through subtle but meaningful practices. Paying attention to bodily responses during interactions. Noticing fatigue after social performance. Observing where resentment appears. Listening for the internal "it's fine" that masks unmet needs. These observations do not require confrontation or disclosure. They require honesty with oneself. Over time, this honesty restores internal trust. Another practical application lies in reframing self-criticism. When patterns such as people-pleasing or emotional withdrawal arise, the chapter encourages inquiry rather than condemnation. Asking, "What is this protecting me from?" opens space for compassion. This compassion is not indulgence. It is stabilizing. It allows the nervous system to relax enough for new responses to become possible. The chapter closes by returning to the concept of the hidden self. It emphasizes that nothing essential has been lost. What was buried was protected. This distinction matters because it transforms healing from a rescue mission into a process of recognition. The authentic self does not need to be created. It needs to be remembered. Slowly, safely, and without force. Overall, Chapter 1 establishes the philosophical and psychological lens through which the rest of the book operates. It teaches that behavior cannot be meaningfully changed without understanding its origin, that identity cannot be reclaimed through discipline alone, and that healing begins not with self-improvement, but with self-understanding. By grounding personal struggle in adaptation rather than defect, the chapter offers both clarity and relief. What the reader ultimately gains from this chapter is not a solution, but a map. A way of seeing themselves that replaces shame with context and judgment with curiosity. This shift is foundational. Without it, change efforts often replicate the very suppression they seek to undo. With it, growth becomes less about becoming someone new and more about returning to what was always there. The chapter does not promise immediate transformation. It promises orientation. And orientation is what allows the rest of the journey to unfold with integrity. If you'd like to explore the book further, you'll find the link in the description.